2 Kings chapter 5. Sorry. 2 Kings chapter 5. This is, we're going to look at Naaman and his encounter with Elisha. This will be a continuation of looking at different people of the Bible and just seeing how they interact with God, with people that know God, and how we can take these different characters in the Bible and apply some of the different principles in our lives. And I kind of like what's going to stand out in this one, because it may not be what's expected so much. But so 2 Kings chapter 5 verse 1, and I'm reading from the New International Version. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. And so there we meet him. Great commander, really cool dude. God's using him. Now he's a Syrian, so he's not Jewish. He's not of the ancestry of Abraham. That is important as we go along. But he's being used by God. He's getting victories. He's a powerful soldier, but he had leprosy. I wonder how many of us in our lives, there may be areas we're really good at, but there's always a but, right? There's always some big but that gets in the way. And that was his, leprosy. And that's a pretty big but at that time, right? Because that's unclean, especially for the Israelites. I mean, you can't go near someone like that. You don't want to touch them. Anybody, really. I mean, they don't want to get the disease and stuff. So, hey, good job killing and fighting and doing all that stuff. But, could you stay in your own tent? Could you eat at your own table? Could you, you're not invited to our poker game. Just do your own thing. It's pretty significant. Verse 2, now bands from Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. And so one of the captives, one of the slaves, one of the individuals that was taken captive was from Israel. She knew about Elijah, and so she tells her, hey, she obviously, even though this guy has taken some captives from Israel and these types of things, has some respect for the woman of the home, has some respect for Naaman, and is saying, hey, you can get cured. Of course, maybe there was a little bit of self-service there too, in that, it'd be a lot nicer to be in a home that doesn't have a leper in it. but she's being kind. She's giving him good advice. Verse 7. I'm sorry. I jumped ahead, didn't I? Verse 4. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, king replied, I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that he may go be cured of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. And so, Naaman's king is cool and wanting to help him. Sends him with a letter, sends him with a lot of silver, gold, clothing, all these things. I mean, great gifts to the king. The king of Israel is like, oh, bummer, man. What? He's sending him to get cured. I can't do it. He's thinking it's like a test or like a setting him up, right? Yeah, you were supposed to cure him of leprosy. We gave you these gifts. You didn't do it. Now we can attack you. Now we can kill you. And so the king of Israel is like freaking out. Sometimes when things happen in our lives, we need to really examine what God's doing and not just jump to conclusions. He's kind of, and legitimately so. I mean, that kind of stuff did happen at that time. But he's just jumping to a conclusion. He's going to the negative. If he had a better relationship with Elijah and understand the power of God better, he would have, instead of tearing his clothes and going, oh, he's trying to have a quarrel, and oh, this is a setup, he could have said, oh, well, yeah, Elijah can do that. Hurry, quick, call Elijah, get him over here. Let's see. But instead, he's thinking about himself. I'm not God. I can't do it. Well, you're right, but God can. Oh, you don't have a good enough relationship with God. Well, Elijah does. Let's get him. When Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him a message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the men came to me, and he will know. Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horse and chariots and stopped at the door of Elijah's house. Elijah sent a messenger to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. So, first of all, Elijah's like, why is the king freaking out? Just let God heal him. Send him over here. God will heal him. The guy goes there, and look at how he comes. I mean, he's got his chariot, he's all fancied up. How does it say it? He went with his horses, his chariots, and he stops at the door of Elijah. Can you imagine him showing up? He's got the chariots and the horses, and he's, here's someone, right? A mighty man, a commander. He's got all the fancy armor, whatever it is he's wearing, and looking good. And other people that are with him, with the horses, the chariot, all that stuff, goes to the door of Elijah. Someone important is here. And don't you love the way Elijah deals with him? He sends a servant, right? How many of you know that's for the protocol of the day, probably not something Naaman would be like, oh, don't you know who's at your door? You ever have people that are like that? If you knew who you were talking to, don't you know who I am? He just sends a servant and tells him to wash in the Jordan. And, no matter how important you think you are, God's more important, and the prophet is the one that has the power. Instead of going there trying to be the big man on the block in front of his house, he should have went humbly to Elijah. He's trying to get healed. Instead of showing up like a big man, he should have came as a humble man, but he wasn't. He was still arrogant, still prideful, still full of himself, and he earned some of that, I guess. So there he is. He's like, go wash 7 times in the Jordan. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, wave his hand over the spot, and cure my leprosy. Are not these other rivers of Damascus better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went off in rage. So he's ticked off. First of all, Elijah didn't even come out, sends a servant. And then he's telling him to wash in the Jordan rather than one of the rivers he would have preferred in his own area. He wants him to wash in this Israelite river. And, I mean, he's ticked off. He's really mad, and he leaves mad. Again, unwilling to humble himself, unwilling to go, well, this is the prophet. He's like, he had in his own mind the way the prophet was supposed to do things. Listen, if we're coming to God for assistance in something, we need to let God do it the way he wants to, right? I mean, how many of you have ever had God answer something in your life and it wasn't the way you expected it to happen? Yeah. I know I have. I mean, I've even had people come to me sometimes and they tell me to pray about some situation, and they would tell me how to pray for the situation. And I'm like, I'm going to pray this way. They would tell me how God was supposed to answer the prayer, and that's how they wanted me to pray. And I'm like, no. Sometimes they get mad when I'd pray it, and then later they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, you were probably right. I was trying to control it. Man, when we come to God, let him do it the way he wants to. Sometimes we have in our mind the way we think God's going to move, and it may be true that God's going to move, but when he does it, it may look totally different than what we think. I was thinking about that when I went on the tour that we went on to the other day, and they did a little interview at one of the places, and they were like, what were you expecting when you came? And I was like, I don't do that. I don't go into something where I know God's going to move and expect it to be a certain way. I just figure God's going to move, and I'll see how he's going to do it. I don't try to envision ahead of time what it's going to look like. I don't know. And I try to approach it that way. I've been in places where God moved, and ahead of time people had these visions and ideas of what they thought it was going to look like, but when it happened, it looked totally different. And that's why I've kind of adopted that in my life, where I'm just like, I'd have people, ask me after some move of God, did you expect that? I was like, I didn't know what to expect. I just figured God was going to do something. And I think that's a good way to do it. Somehow I've learned that along the way. But Naaman sure didn't. Here he is, he's like, he didn't come out, didn't wave his hand over the spot. And then he tells me to go wash in the river. It's the Jordan River. He could have sent me to another river. And then this is the guy that I really want to focus in on. Naaman's servants. It's plural here. So went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you to wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. And so the servants come to him, and they're like, this is wisdom here, right? They're like, hey, and this is a principle that we can take, and this is why I want to focus on this for a second, because sometimes it's the servant that is the wiser. Here's this great guy, this great man, this great commander, has got all these great victories. But when it comes to God, he's not too wise. And the servant has a great principle. He's like, sometimes when it comes to God, we think, well, if it's something complicated, if God gives us this task, this quest, this thing that we have to do, then we would do it. But if he just says, just go dip in the water 7 times, we're like, oh, that's too easy. I'm not going to do that, And we do that sometimes with God. Sometimes he'll give us an answer, and it's a simple answer, and it's like, just do that. And we're just like, no, that won't work. That's not the way to, no, it's got to be, we got to make it more complicated, more difficult, more. And I think one of the reasons that we'll do that is because then we can take some claim in what we did. Right? If he told them, okay, you got to climb to the highest mountain and put a flag up there and camp out for a week, something weird like that, then it'd be like, oh, I was able to climb the mountain. I was able to do that. But just go to the water and dip in 7 times. That's not too impressive. Who are you going to brag to about that? There's a bunch of kids swimming on the bank of the river doing the same thing. It's like, oh, that's not too impressive. And that's the way we are sometimes with God, where it's like, if it would have been this thing, because then we could tell the story, right? Well, God said, and I had to go on this quest, and I had to... Sorry, just dip in the water. So the servants had the wisdom, and praise God for that, because oftentimes... there's times in our lives when we can be a servant to someone else. That's a great position to be in. That can be a position of wisdom. That can be a position of help. That can be the better position. After all, Jesus didn't come to be served, but to serve. And the greatest in the kingdom is the one that serves the least. So the servant position is a great position. And the servant position is really the hero, I think, of this story. Because he's the one that, here is Naaman angry. He's left from the prophet. He's ready to just go home. And it's the servants that come and say, hey, wait a minute. Think about it. And then he's like, oh, yeah. And so he didn't listen to the prophet. Didn't listen to what God told him through the prophet. Didn't listen to the prophet's servants. But when his servants remind him, then he's like, okay. And he goes, dips in the water. And it works. He's clean like that of a young man. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is a God in all the world. There is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept now a gift from your servant." Now, this sounds good on the surface, right? He's saying there's no God but this God in Israel, and I want to give you a gift. But look at how he approaches the prophet again. He's standing before the prophet. Kind of pointed out. He's not bowing. He's not kneeling. He's not humbling himself. He's not doing it again. He's not doing it in a humble way. He's standing saying, "Hey, now I know there's no other God, and I'm this great person. I'm going to acknowledge it. And by the way, I have gifts for you." You know, it's really he's still kind of in that same position of being the big man on the block, being the one that's going to say, hey, you know, I'm recognizing your God. You should be happy about that. Okay. Can you imagine God being impressed with someone saying, "Hey, you're God"? Can you imagine Elijah being impressed? No. Yeah, you're right. Let's see what he does with his gifts. Verse 16, the prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. And the prophet understands, you know, Naaman, if he was accepted that gift from him, then he could say, you know, he bought his healing, you know, he earned his healing. He's still trying to have that little bit of him being involved in it and not just God doing it. And the prophet understands that, and he says, "No, I'm not going to take it. Come on, please, you know." Yeah, it is. It's a control thing. It's a, you know, hey, oh yeah, he's a pretty good prophet. You know, I made him rich, by the way. Remember, Abraham had the same kind of thing with when he went and rescued the Sodom and Gomorrah, and the king's like, you know, keep all this stuff, and he's like, no, nobody's going to say they made me rich. Oh, no, only God's going to do that, and that's what it is. And it doesn't, you know, ring out that strong unless you're kind of looking at it closer, but it's there. It's right there. 17, "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant," and I do think it's funny where he's saying, "I'm your servant." How many of you think he's really wanting to serve Elijah? Or is he just kind of saying that because that's the proper thing to say? I think it's the latter. I think he's just saying it because it's like the proper thing to say. I really don't think he sees himself as a servant of Elijah. I just don't see it in his actions. I really don't. So he's like, "Your servant, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I will bow there also when I bow down in the temple of this other God. May the Lord forgive your servant for this." And Elijah says, "Go in peace." So he's like, so I'm this servant of God, and I'm going to serve God. And, you know, give me some of the dirt here, because if I'm going to make sacrifices, you know, I'm just so committed to this God. And but listen, you know, when the king is in this other temple, you know, I'll be with him, and he'll bow down, and just, you know, just to keep him steady, you know, just I'll be bowing with him, but, you know, I'm not really, you know, serving the God. So, you know, if your God could forgive me and just, I'm going to do what I was doing before, but if you could give me a little bit of atonement, a little clemency here, a little indulgence, you know, that'd be cool. That'd be good. I'm really committed to your God. Just won't look like it. I think he did see God as being powerful. I mean, after all, hell cured him of the leprosy. But he wasn't quite to that point where he was going to offend any other gods. Of course, the position is, well, I just want to offend my master. It's my master. And who's he really serving? Who's he saying he's going to serve? That king? That king's God, sort of? Not Elijah. As a matter of fact, he's not coming to Elijah as a servant. He's coming to Elijah as, hey, I need you to do something for me. I need you to serve me. I need you to give me a little forgiveness here. I need you to, hey, can you put in a good word with God? Elijah's cool. He's like, go in peace. After Naaman had traveled some distance, one of Elijah's servants said to himself, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So he hurried after Naaman, saw him running toward him. Naaman saw him running toward him. He got down from the chariot to meet him. Is everything all right? He asked. Everything is all right. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged him to accept them and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothes. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Elisha's servant. When he came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. Then he went and he stood before his master Elijah. And so here's this servant of Elijah, and he's like, hold on. Elijah had a really good thing here. He could have got a little something from him, and I don't have to get everything that he was going to give, but what I could do is, I'll just tell him, hey, there's a couple people here, and, get some money, get some clothes, and if you understand how clothes were made back then, you understand why it was so valuable. Today, clothes, they're laying on the streets. But then it was a very valuable thing, and so he goes and he gets it, he kind of hides it in his house, goes and stands before Elijah, and, when you're a servant to someone else, and this really is a story of servants, isn't it? You need to follow their lead. If Elijah sends him on his way and says he doesn't want anything, it's not up to you to go and say, but wait. And of course, Naaman had no problem. He's like, oh yeah, hey, whatever, hey, take, I'm good. I was going to give you something anyway. He doesn't think anything of it. He's not out anything in a sense, because he was wanting to give. So for Naaman, it's not a big deal. But for Elijah, it's a big deal, right? Because here's his servant going behind his back, lying about it to get it, and doing something that he said, no, I don't want anything from him. I mean, that's wrong, right? Well, who's hurt? It's a victimless crime. Ever hear that one? Victimless crime. Okay.
All the time on DVDs.
Yeah.
It's not a victimless crime.
It's not a victimless crime. Come on, guys. Someone's a victim. I don't know. It seems like if there's a crime, there's got to be some kind of victim. I don't know. Where have you been? Elisha asked. Your servant did not go anywhere. Nothing to see here, folks. These are not the droids you're looking for. Move along. Yeah, that doesn't really work with a prophet. If you're wanting to hide something, hanging out with a prophet's probably not the best place to do it. Yeah, that's not, yeah. Elijah said to him, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot and met you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes, olive groves, vineyards, flocks, herds, or men servants and maid servants? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. Then he went from Elijah's presence, and he was leprous as white as snow. And so Elijah's like, dude, I was there. The prophet in his spirit was right there when it was happening. He saw the whole thing happening. That seems like magic or something like that. It's no big deal. Think about how we could do it today. If we had a little video camera there and Wi-Fi in our phones, we could see what's happening. Why can't God do that without equipment? Of course he can. He could show somebody what's happening somewhere else.
He just got more advanced equipment.
Yeah, he's got much more advanced equipment. You don't have to have the wires. You don't have to have the glass. You don't have to have electronics. Yeah, he can do that.
No batteries required.
Absolutely. It's funny because, different things like that, people think, whoa, that's like weird. That's like magic. That's like, I can't even imagine that happening. It happens all the time. We stream stuff to our phones all the time. We can see things that are happening. Like Teo, when he was sharing on Facebook Live, he was in Rwanda. I was watching it at my house, and I was typing messages to him, and he was getting it while he was talking. And he's like, yeah, Dennis, I agree with that, or whatever. And it's like, he's on the other side, he's in Africa. And yet at the same time, of course God could do that. Of course God could show you something that's happening. That's why some of the kings were afraid, because, they'd talk about the prophets and they'd be like, well, they know what's happening in your bedchamber. They know, there's no secrets you can hide from these guys. And the servant then, what a great gift for him. What a wonderful reward for what he did. He gets the leprosy. The very thing, you thought getting that money was good. Well, that's not all. There's supplies are limited. Order today, but that's not all. That's not all. Not only do you get the silver, not only do you get the clothes, but you also get leprosy and for your descendants.
Forever.
Ever and ever.
But wait, there's more.
There's more. Yeah. That's great. I love that. And so here we see just a series of servants, Naaman's servants being wise, really being the heroes of the story. Naaman kind of trying to say he's a servant, but not so much. And Elijah's servant, he has one unnamed that's able to take the message to Naaman that ends up leading to him being healed. And then he has another one that's like, I'm going to get me a little something out of it. And he got a lot of something out of it. And so as we serve the Lord, we need to see, what kind of servants are we? Are we going to be wise ones? Are we going to be kind of false ones like Naaman, kind of do it in our own power, our own strength, tell God how to do it, see, make sure God moves in the way we want it to, or like Elijah's, get something out of it, not follow the lead of our master? Or are we going to be, committed to God and wise and looking at the realities and principles and functioning in that way? Anybody got any questions or comments before we close in prayer? I think there's some cool stuff in the story. Leprosy. Heavenly Father, I thank you for your love. I thank you for the opportunity we have to serve you and to love you and to just put you first in all we do. Help us, Lord, to be wise in our interactions with others and our service to others and our love for others. And help us, Lord, to be committed to you and to not just expect you and tell you how to do things, but to do what you have us to do. And if it's easy, it's easy. If it's not, it's not. Listen to that still small voice and not have to have some earthquake or thunder or lightning or any of that kind of stuff. Help us, Lord, to just be real in our lives with you. And we thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.